Growing up in the United States, money is rarely introduced as just a tool. Long before people earn it, manage it, or even fully understand it, money already exists as a story in the background. It appears in conversations, in entertainment, in school hallways, and in quiet family moments. It shows up not only as currency, but as a signal of possibility, pressure, and identity. Over time, these signals begin to shape expectations, often without being noticed. From an early age, many people in the U.S. are exposed to the idea that money represents movement. It suggests progress, independence, and forward motion. The culture often frames life as a series of steps, where each phase is supposed to unlock more choice and comfort than the last. Money becomes part of that imagined path, not as a guarantee, but as a symbol of whether things are unfolding as expected. Even when no one says this out loud, the pattern is absorbed quietly. We might think of childhood as a time removed from financial concerns, yet subtle messages are still present. Children notice tone before they understand content. They sense stress during certain conversations and ease during others. They observe which topics create tension and which ones feel safe. Over time, money becomes associated not just with objects or transactions, but with emotional shifts in the room. This association forms long before logic enters the picture. As people grow older, money often becomes linked to independence in the American imagination. The idea of standing on one's own is deeply valued, and money is frequently positioned as the bridge between dependence and autonomy. This connection can shape expectations about timing. There is often an unspoken sense that financial independence should arrive alongside adulthood, even though adulthood itself is rarely clearly defined. When reality moves at a different pace, confusion can quietly settle in. It feels natural to assume that financial expectations come from direct instruction, but much of the learning is indirect. Media plays a significant role here. Television, movies, and online stories often present money as a background indicator of success or struggle. Characters with money are shown as having options, mobility, and confidence. Characters without it are often portrayed as constrained or worried. These patterns repeat so often that they become mental shortcuts rather than conscious beliefs. Over time, the brain begins to associate money with personal trajectory. It stops being just a resource and starts feeling like feedback. Am I moving forward? Am I keeping up? Am I falling behind? These questions can arise even when no explicit comparison is being made. The mind fills in gaps using cultural templates it has seen before, many of which were learned passively. Social comparison plays a particularly strong role in shaping money expectations in the U.S., not necessarily because people want to compare, but because comparison is built into visibility. Lifestyles are often shared openly, whether through social media, casual conversation, or cultural storytelling. Seeing others reach milestones can quietly influence what feels normal or delayed. This doesn't require envy or judgment. It happens even when people are content with their own lives. The psychology behind this is rooted in how humans assess belonging. We are wired to look for signals that we are aligned with our environment. When money becomes one of those signals, it can start to carry social meaning beyond its practical role. It becomes a way the brain gauges whether someone fits into the expected timeline of their surroundings. There is also a strong narrative in the U.S. around possibility. The idea that opportunity is available, if not evenly, then at least visibly. This narrative can create optimism, but it can also create pressure. When possibility is emphasized, lack of outcome can feel personal, even when it is shaped by factors outside individual control. The mind doesn't always distinguish between structural influences and personal responsibility. We might think that expectations only apply to major life outcomes, but they also shape everyday emotions. Small financial decisions can carry emotional weight because they feel symbolic. A purchase, a delay, or a limitation can trigger reflections about direction rather than necessity. The emotion isn't always about the money itself, but about what it seems to represent in the larger story. Another influence comes from how success is framed culturally. Success is often associated with visibility. Achievements are meant to be seen, recognized, and validated. Money, in this context, becomes one of the more visible markers. This visibility can turn money into a social language, even when no one intends to speak it directly. People begin to read signals into circumstances, sometimes inaccurately, sometimes unconsciously. It's also important to recognize the role of unpredictability. While the U.S. emphasizes opportunity, it also contains significant variability. Outcomes can differ widely even among people with similar effort or background. This unpredictability can heighten emotional responses to money. When outcomes feel uncertain, the brain tends to monitor signals more closely. Money becomes one of those signals, carrying more emotional weight than its immediate function would suggest. Cognitive biases play a role here as well. The availability bias, for example, can shape expectations by emphasizing stories that are easier to recall. Highly visible success stories often receive more attention than quiet, ordinary experiences. This can distort perception, making extreme outcomes feel more common than they are. Over time, this skewed visibility can influence how people interpret their own progress. There is also the concept of the default path, an imagined sequence of how life is supposed to unfold. In the U.S., this path is often loosely defined but widely felt. Education, work, independence, and stability are often assumed to follow one another. Money weaves through this sequence as both a requirement and a measurement. When life diverges from the imagined order, money-related thoughts can become more emotionally charged. We might notice that financial stress doesn't always align with actual conditions. Someone can feel pressure even during relatively stable periods, while another may feel calm during uncertainty. This difference often comes from expectation rather than circumstance. When expectations are high or rigid, even small deviations can feel significant. When expectations are flexible, the same deviations may feel manageable. Family dynamics also shape money expectations in subtle ways. Even when families avoid direct discussions, patterns are still observed. Children notice whether money is treated as a private topic or an open one. They notice whether it is framed as a source of anxiety, pride, or neutrality. These observations form emotional associations that persist into adulthood. In many American households, money is tied to responsibility. Being responsible often means managing on one's own, not relying too heavily on others. This framing can influence how people feel about asking for help or acknowledging difficulty. Money struggles may be internalized rather than shared, reinforcing the sense that financial experiences are personal tests rather than shared challenges. The emphasis on independence can also shape time-based expectations. There is often an implicit timeline for when certain forms of stability should be achieved. When reality doesn't align with that timeline, the discrepancy can create discomfort. This discomfort isn't always about comparison with others, but about comparison with an internalized schedule that was never consciously chosen. Media narratives often reinforce this timeline subtly. Stories frequently focus on early success or dramatic transformation. Quiet, gradual paths receive less attention. This imbalance can influence what feels normal or acceptable. The mind absorbs these patterns and uses them as reference points, even when it knows intellectually that they are selective representations. We might assume that money expectations are logical, but they are often emotional first. Logic tends to enter later, sometimes as justification rather than origin. Emotional responses arise from meaning, and meaning is shaped by repetition. The more often money appears linked to certain outcomes, the stronger the association becomes. Another factor is the way money intersects with identity in the U.S. Identity is often framed as self-made. This framing can intensify the emotional relationship with money, because money becomes associated with self-definition. It may feel like evidence of capability or progress, even when it reflects circumstances beyond individual influence. This can create a paradox. On one hand, people are encouraged to believe in possibility and agency. On the other hand, outcomes are influenced by complex systems. Navigating this tension can lead to internal conflict, especially when expectations lean heavily toward personal responsibility without equal acknowledgement of variability. We might think of money as external, but psychologically it often feels internal. Reactions to it can feel immediate and personal. This is not because money inherently carries emotion, but because it has been paired with emotional experiences over time. The brain learns through association, not explanation. Even language reflects this pairing. Phrases about money often overlap with emotional states. Feeling secure, comfortable, or pressured are emotional descriptors, not numerical ones. This overlap reinforces the idea that money is intertwined with feeling rather than function. As people move through adulthood, these early formed expectations continue to influence interpretation. New experiences are filtered through old frameworks. A neutral situation may feel tense if it resembles past moments of uncertainty. A positive change may feel insufficient if it doesn't match the imagined pace of progress. Social environments also matter. Living in spaces where financial signals are highly visible can amplify awareness. Even without direct comparison, constant exposure to markers of progress can heighten sensitivity. The brain adapts to what it sees frequently, adjusting its sense of normal accordingly. At the same time, the U.S. cultural emphasis on optimism can make it harder to openly acknowledge financial uncertainty. Optimism is valued, and struggle may be framed as temporary or transitional. While this can be encouraging, it can also create pressure to appear confident even when feelings are mixed. Money-related emotions may then remain unprocessed. We might notice that conversations about money often swing between extremes. Either they focus on success or avoid the topic altogether. This polarization can make it harder to hold nuanced perspectives. The absence of neutral dialogue leaves people relying on internal assumptions rather than shared understanding. The psychology of anticipation also plays a role. When people expect money to unlock certain emotional states, delays can feel disappointing even if nothing negative has occurred. The mind had attached an emotional outcome to a future moment, and when that moment doesn't deliver the expected feeling, confusion arises. It's also worth noting how adaptability functions here. Humans are adaptable, but expectations can lag behind reality. Even as circumstances change, emotional responses may take longer to adjust. This lag can create periods where feelings don't match current conditions, leading to internal friction. We might think that awareness alone changes these patterns, but awareness is often just the first step. The goal of understanding money psychology isn't to eliminate emotion, but to recognize its origins. When people understand that their reactions are shaped by culture, memory, and association, those reactions can feel less mysterious. In the U.S., money is often discussed in terms of choice. Choice is framed as freedom, and freedom is deeply valued. This can add emotional weight to financial limitations, even when those limitations are temporary or situational. The mind interprets reduced choice as reduced freedom, triggering discomfort. This interpretation is not irrational. It reflects learned values. When freedom is emphasized culturally, Anything that appears to constrain it can feel significant. Money then becomes a proxy for autonomy, magnifying emotional responses. Over time, these layers accumulate. Money becomes tied to independence, identity, safety, and future imagination. Each layer adds weight. By adulthood, money rarely feels neutral because it has been carrying meaning for years. We might notice that even hypothetical scenarios involving money can trigger emotion. Simply thinking about future possibilities can create anticipation or concern. This suggests that the emotional relationship with money is not dependent on immediate action, but on interpretation. The way people talk about money internally matters too. Inner narratives often echo cultural messages. Thoughts about progress, delay, or adequacy can reflect absorbed expectations rather than objective assessment. Recognizing this can create space between feeling and fact. As people become more aware of these influences, they may begin to see patterns more clearly. Not patterns to fix, but patterns to understand. Understanding doesn't remove emotion, but it can soften its intensity by adding context. In the end, growing up in the U.S. shapes money expectations through repetition, visibility, and cultural storytelling. These expectations are not chosen deliberately, yet they feel deeply personal. Money becomes a mirror reflecting imagined timelines, social signals, and emotional associations. A thoughtful way to approach this is not by judging the expectations themselves, but by acknowledging their origins. When people see that their feelings about money are shaped by environment as much as experience, those feelings can feel less isolating. Money, in this sense, becomes less of a verdict and more of a language. A language learned early, spoken often, and interpreted emotionally. Understanding that language doesn't require changing behavior. It simply invites curiosity. And perhaps that curiosity is the most valuable outcome. Not to resolve every tension, but to recognize that money feels the way it does for reasons that go beyond numbers. Reasons rooted in culture, memory, and the quiet stories absorbed over time.